everyone. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here today. My name is Ingrid. I'm the coordinator of the Economic Development Working Group. This is a working group of the Young Scholars Initiative of INET, which is the Institute for New Economic Thinking. We're a relatively new group. We just started last fall. What we do is we get together and talk about alternative approaches to economic development. It's the first time today for some of us to meet in person. We've only had webinars so far. And we've had webinars on the role of institutions in development, the role of economic history and development, Adam Smith as a development economist, and the UN, the role of the UN in development, and a lot of other topics. There's no official requirement to join our group. We have undergrads, MA students, PhD students, even some professors, and development professionals. Our members come from all over the world, different institutions, different disciplines. We have people following from all over the world on the live stream right now. And they can participate through Twitter. So everyone should feel free to tweet using the hashtag YSIDev. We'll collect questions from Twitter as well. I'll go through the questions on Twitter and collect them for the speakers. Today, we'll be discussing the regional challenges of development as well as competing theories of development. And we have two PhD students from the New School that are chairing the sessions, Marjan Fadavi and Lo Garada. And we also have an event tomorrow for YSI members, but everyone's free to join. And at that event, there will be student presentations as well as presentations by invited speakers. The topics are the role of the UN in development and the role of labor, state, and capital in development, with the example of South Africa. And also we have a panel on alternatives to the growth paradigm in development. So our invited speakers for tomorrow are Professor Sanjay Reddy, Ian Taylor, and Rex McKenzie. So we're looking forward to that, and we hope many of you will also join for that event. We're always looking for new members that are open-minded and looking for understandings of development outside of what the neoclassical economics allows for. This conference has been very generously funded by 5 institutions, actually. The Institute for New Economic Thinking, the Economic Student Union, the Graduate Faculty Student Union, the University Student Senate, and the Swartz Center for Economic and Policy Analysis, SEPA. So we're very grateful for that. I don't want to take too much of your time, but if you're interested in this group, you can grab me in the break or at the reception afterwards. Please don't leave when this event is over. The reception follows right after, upstairs in the economics department. There's going to be signs showing you the way. And we have lots of wine and food. And also another incentive to come to the reception is that there's going to be a raffle for Anwar Sheikh's new book, Capital. So you should come, you might win this amazing book. And so Professor Sanjay Reddy has kindly agreed to give the opening remarks to this event. Sanjay has been a valuable supporter for this group. He was actually the first invited speaker for the group last fall, and he's also supported this conference. Sanjay is a professor in economics at the New School for Social Research. His areas of work include development economics, international economics, and economics and philosophy. He has held fellowships from the Center for Population and Development Studies at Harvard University and the Center for Human Values at Princeton University. And he's currently a member of the independent high-level team of advisors to the Economic and Social Councils of the United Nations on the longer-term positioning of the UN development system. He has a PhD in economics from Harvard, an MPhil in social anthropology from Cambridge, and an AD in applied mathematics with physics from Harvard. We're glad to have you here, Sanjay. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Ingrid neglected to mention, despite the embarrassing description of my entire curriculum vitae, she neglected to mention the most important qualification I have, which is that I'm a co-author of Ingrid. And in fact, we have, in particular, co-authored a paper on global development goals, asking the question of whether or not there is a justification for global development goals and what what that justification exactly would be, since we felt that the case was under-theorized, but also to ask the question of what is the practical political economy of implementing such goals. And we took a rather skeptical view, I would say. So I'm not sure whether or not anyone has read that paper, in particular people who have appointed me to committees having something to do with global development goals. But Ingrid was very crucial, needless to say, in helping me to understand and think through the issues. And I hope I was of some benefit to her in helping her to think through and understand the issues. I'm very, very pleased to add my words to Ingrid's and to others here at the New School in welcoming all of you who are not at the New School, either those who are present electronically today or who have come here for the purpose. Very glad to see many people who have done that. It's a fantastic initiative because of its interdisciplinary character, but also because it's aiming, as I understand it, to present a critical view of how economists very often think about development and how development is very often thought about, which is very much needed and I hope can help to revivify or even revolutionize the pedagogy as well as the reigning intellectual currents that influence research and thinking on development. So welcome to all of you on behalf of the New School Department, myself personally, and other members of the community. I know that the YSI group concerned with development is actually called an interest group on economic development. And some of those who are taking a class with me at present called Economic Development 1 will know that I have a slightly skeptical view also of the concept of economic development. So let me start off with that, since I'm being asked to make opening remarks. What exactly is this thing called economic development? In my view, economic development doesn't exist. If by that we mean to think about the development process as governed by purely economic dynamics which are specific to the economic realm. I think that all of the major questions that confront us involve the intersection of different kinds of concerns in practice. And it is extremely dangerous to neglect those intersections. And I'm going to say more, I hope, if there's a time later on, about the role that there might be for a specifically economic approach. But nevertheless, I think that most of the development challenges we face involve the interaction of political, institutional, social, cultural, ecological, as well as economic questions. So to me, the concept of development economics, understood as the perspective which the discipline of economics has on the development process, makes much more sense conceptually than the idea of economic development, understood as a process in the world which has its own dynamics, which are purely economic in nature. I think if we take that view, then of course the discipline of economics may still have something very valuable to contribute because of its particular methodological traditions and its ways of analyzing the world. But those would necessarily have to confront other understandings and other perspectives and to be synthesized in some way in order for us to understand the development process and to make reasonable or sensible prescriptions. Not to be too much of a linguistic nitpicker, but I would like to also discuss the sub-themes of today's conference. The first, regional development challenges. What exactly do we mean by regional development challenges? I'd like to suggest that one of the ways in which alternative minded social scientists can indeed fruitfully approach problems of development is by taking an empirically informed view which draws on understandings of what is actually taking place locally and regionally. This having been said, there are also limits to such an approach. So first let me give an example of the way in which it might be extremely pertinent, and then let me give you an example of the limits. Many of you are familiar with the fad for randomized controlled trials. Perhaps some of you have even had fortune or misfortune, depending on how you view it, of being heavily engaged with one or more such trials. One of the premises of randomized controlled trials is that the knowledge which derives from them can be applied in other comparable contexts elsewhere. And this premise is deeply questionable for various reasons, having to do with the implicit premises about the nature of causal relations which operate in the social world, which would make such lessons transferable. And of course, this point has been widely recognized by many of the critics of randomized controlled trials. And those of you who know that literature would know that well, including well-known development scholars such as Danny Roderick, Angus Deaton, the philosopher of science Nancy Cartwright, and others. So I'm not exactly reporting news here, even if this is a particular issue that has troubled many of us for a very long time. So the counter-argument to the idea that randomized controlled trials provide usable or useful knowledge is the idea that locality in fact matters. And the very specific kinds of causal relations which identify a specific locality and distinguish it from another may well be pertinent in determining whether a specific so-called intervention in fact has an impact or not, and whether it has the same degree of impact in one place as opposed to another. And this is, of course, just to skim the surface of the many different issues that can be raised with respect to randomized controlled trials. This is only one of the ways in which specificity or locality rears its head in, or exhibits itself in the domain of development. But it is an example of how not attending to the problem can indeed lead one in very questionable directions at the cost of tremendous expenditure of intellectual and perhaps financial resources before one has discovered one's mistake. And indeed, now they are beginning to be published or to be brought together for the first time compendia of the existing RCTs that have been done, showing that in fact there is a problem of external validity or cross-contextual comparability. But then there are also examples of the limits of the local or the regional view. In this connection, I would like to give a very different example from the realm of macroeconomics. Many of you will recall that after the crisis of 2008 began in 2007-2008, and heavily affected many of the developed countries that would have been dubbed part of the core of the world economy by dependency or world systems theorists. Many of the developing countries that had been experiencing robust economic growth continued to do so. And so for a period of time, the thesis of what came to be called decoupling was floated, with the Financial Times, The Economist, and the other organs of financial opinion putting forward the idea that perhaps the link had for once and for all been broken. There was no longer a caboose which was pulled by the train engine in the north, but there were perhaps two engines, or maybe it was even the other way around. Maybe the engine was now in the south and the caboose in the north. This proved, needless to say, to be a fond hope, because the functioning of the global economic system as an integrated system in which the dynamics of the north and the south could not be separated out eventually. And of course, today we are seeing the effects. The crisis, political crisis, as well as economic crisis in Brazil is one of those effects, but it is visible throughout the developing world that in various ways, through various interlinkages having to do with capital flight and many other transmission mechanisms, the fates of the two cannot be entirely disentangled. So a systemic view of global capitalism is unavoidable in understanding the short run as well as the long run dynamics that are likely to prevail. Let me take up the second theme now of competing theories of development. I am very gratified and eager also to see the fruit of the organizers bringing together different theories of development in this particular panel. But I do not myself tend to think that we have to view such theories as necessarily competing. Rather, very often, they can contribute in their different ways to an integrated or holistic perspective upon a problem. Why did the house burn down? There could be many reasons, one of which was the presence of oxygen. Another of which was that somebody carelessly left a cigarette butt on the floor. Another of which was that the house was built out of wood. Another of which was that the fire engine took a long time to arrive, and so on and so forth. It's a multi-causal phenomenon, ultimately. And that is, in fact, typically the case in many of the situations that we are addressing and concerned with in development. And insofar as they are multi-causal phenomena in which, moreover, the short run and the medium run matter, not just the long run. We're not just concerned with whether or not we get to some fabled steady state and comparative statics over that steady state, but rather deeply concerned with the transition path, which is measured in terms of decades, and not merely in terms of seconds or minutes or even years. The questions of what exactly it is that influences the dynamics along the transition path, which may be various in kind, will be very important to attend to. And I think a critical perspective, and I would say a realistic perspective on development, would necessarily have to, from the first, confront this diversity. And to give an example, as we know, one of the ways in which the Bretton Woods institution's thinking about development has evolved, certainly from the early 1980s onwards, is that they have added more and more variables to their model, so to speak. So whereas at first it was thought that only macroeconomic stabilization mattered, it then came to be realized that the long-term framework for growth mattered. But then it was thought that that long-term framework depended only upon the appropriate implementation of orthodox policies, such as lowering trade barriers or privatizing companies. And then it was realized that, in fact, there were other variables which needed to be added to the mix, even within that orthodox framework, quite apart from the question of whether the orthodox prescription was ever particularly subject to skepticism itself. For instance, so-called human capital or capabilities, governance, institutional variables, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, leading to what some have called the post-Washington consensus, which is the view that not only does everything matters, but everything matters in a very specific and localized way. The particular things that matter more in a particular place, requiring a detailed analysis, for instance, of the pertinent growth diagnostics, which is one view about the matter. Now, that particular decades-long history of intellectual evolution, in some sense, involves the progressive correction of a series of mistakes, whether or not it has led to the appropriate conclusions still. And my own view is that perhaps it has not. So, in fact, it does all matter. And part of our task as development economists and students of development generally is to accept that and wade in the mud, trying to make sense of that complexity. That is less satisfying than having an aesthetically pleasing and economical theory. But it is what we have to do if we want to confront the reality in a responsible fashion. Now, it's quite appropriate that Professor Sheikh's book on capitalism is being raffled, which I know is a major draw for all of you. It will be a reason that you will stay to the end of the conference today, because he does take a deeper and a more long-term view of the dynamics of capitalism. I'm certainly not against that. I just don't want us to pay no heed to the specificities of the transition path, and indeed of the ways in which turbulent capitalism affects individual countries and persons. Turbulent capitalism being, again, brought to Professor Sheikh. The conference promises to be very intellectually informative and enlivening. I am personally looking forward greatly to hearing the different points of view and to asking the question of whether or not we can understand development in a way that transcends the limitations of the economists while also bringing the specific expertise of the economists to bear. And I think that that is our dual task, to do both of those things today and every day. Thank you very much.